All right, happy Friday, everybody. Thank you again for joining us all for another PWA Studio Community Sync. We have a pretty packed agenda today with some demos from the team. We'll try to make our way through all of that content. Obviously, we'll save some time at the end for additional questions, any items that we might have from the community in Community Corner, and then we'll wrap up and step into our weekend, right? So we have to start off with, we're going to start with Tommy today for demos. As you guys saw on the agenda, we have a quick update on kind of out of stock and an issue that Tommy addressed. Take it away, Tommy.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, so we had a tiny bug pop up that required a large solution, and figured it'd be best to highlight this in case you've encountered it. It's kind of just a weird edge case in GraphQL, and I'll start off with like a today I learned. Oh geez, I lost my spot. All right. So today I learned if you can get data and errors back from GraphQL, and this is exactly the behavior we see from the Magento GraphQL API when you have a product that goes out of stock. So in this example, I just have a cart already set up. I have two items in that cart, whiskers and mittens. Mittens has gone out of stock. I waited too long. Somebody else purchased that kitten. So one of the things you'll see is let me bump this up. In that GraphQL call, find the right one, get cart details, you'll see data and errors. So we get our cart back with all of our items. And then I'll talk about that in a second. There's a null item there. So we get both of our items back, even though one of them is out of stock, and then we also get errors saying that some of the products are out of stock. So it's kind of like an error that we don't want to be blocking, but a lot of times we write code that, like, if I receive an error, something went wrong and I don't want to render, but that's not the case here. So first I'll go over the treatment, then I'll talk about this guy a little bit. And then I'll try not to take up too much time, so we leave plenty of time left for Zetlin to talk about extensibility. So the treatment now is we no longer block. So I think previously, if I were to try to interact with anything in my cart, I would just get toasts saying like there is an out-of-stock item in your cart. So now instead, we're just going to kind of ignore that error. Since all the code is kind of written to block on errors, we kind of had to make this decision to just ignore it. And then with ignoring it, we have to decide when to address it. So we decided on 3 areas. We're not really going to like prevent you from like trying to check out, but if you go through each of these 3 warnings and you ignore them, you're going to have a bad time. So the first one is in the mini cart. You'll see that an item is currently out of stock. We'll highlight which one of those items is out of stock. We also tell you it needs to be removed if you want to check out. Additionally, if you go to your cart, or if you're on mobile, you don't have the mini cart, you'll again see another notice. An item in your cart is currently out of stock, must be removed. And if you ignore that, we get a little more bold and say, you must do this. We make it convenient for you to go back to your cart. And then, of course, if you remove that item, everything's all good again, and you can continue in your checkout process. So I did want to highlight how we did this. It piggybacked on some work that Stephen recently did. So we used a on-air link in Apollo. So this is kind of deep into Apollo's middleware. When it receives a response, on-air is kind of one of the first links to fire, and allows you to kind of just do whatever you want with any error. So like I mentioned, up in index.js. We just added additional logic to the error link that fires to detect this error, so we can ignore it. So a little fragile in that. Hopefully, they don't ever change this error message. But when we see this error, we do a few things. We slice it out of the error response, so that will cause it not to throw in any kind of query or mutation. Um, and then we also do, you saw that null, um, no, not that. There's a way to do this, right?
Top right of the file.
Thanks. All right, so we do two things. We slice out that null item. That is a bug that Magento Core has acknowledged, and they should be fixing it. One of our architects did mention that that is kind of a common pattern, so maybe look out for that. Maybe Magento will come back and say like the null product is supposed to like doubly indicate to you that there was an error that you need to go look at. But I think they've said that was a bug and they're going to pull that out. But so for right now, we're going to fix that bug by just slicing it out of the cart response that we get. And then we also want to make sure that we slice out that error message so it doesn't throw. And also, if you had like something monitoring the error response from like a use query or a use mutation, you probably were going to like throw a toast or like throw something on the form, but we feel confident that this is something you can safely ignore and just address when you see fit. So I think that's it. I kind of covered a lot there. Any questions about this change?
Hey Tommy, you mentioned that so we're fixing this bug where the first item is null in this case. This is only client side, right? We're splicing it out of the response that we get and then what we're using to render. Does that item get removed after you at any point, or is it only like does it disappear after you remove the out of stock item, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's
So if I
related
go,
to that item being out of stock.
yes.
Okay.
So yeah, the bug was like, yeah, it's for some reason the error didn't have a current reference to the actual product, so it created a null one. So it could say, I have an error, but I don't know for which product, so I'm gonna create a null product. It's a very odd thing. But yes, once you remove that item, that code doesn't kick in anymore. That null thing, the null product does go away.
Okay. And I had another question. Can you see us doing this for any other cases in the app? Sort of a non-blocking error can we expect? Was there anything you discovered in your work on this PR?
Um, I haven't done any digging to see if there's any other like positive error cases from the
Yeah.
Magento GraphQL API. That if it did come up again, we would probably do it that way. But I think there's an architecture proposal that kind of would, even though this is supported by the spec, it's a little weird to like have a positive error or a non-blocking error or an informational error. I don't know what you want to call it. So they're talking about putting that on the like result set. So there'd be a field called like user errors or something like that that
Yeah.
would, if you cared about blocking on errors, you would like go through that field. But I don't know if that's been accepted yet. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind if we do, yeah, if we do find another kind of positive error case that we don't want to block on. I think this is a perfect solution here.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that it's an error at all because it's not blocking. And like it could have just been informational. We could have just checked for the stock status, which is a property on the item itself, and done this UI flow. But the reason we have to do this is because it actually does prevent a user from checking out if there's an out of stock item, and we have to surface that somehow.
Yep. I think it's just one of those things. It was modeled after Luma, so Luma doesn't
Classic.
Doesn't say anything about an out of stock item until you get to checkout. So we're at least like trying to get a little more in front of it. I think there's an epic coming up where there might be like a toast that we pop like very early. As soon as we know it's out of stock, we'll let you know. You could even like automate just removing that item, and like I think that's what Amazon does. Is don't know if I can say that word. They like automatically just remove it from your cart and then tell you. So I mean, you could do something like that. And Air Handler is actually like super powerful. And like, if there's anything that you're getting from GraphQL that you don't like even in the response object, like you can change it. So it's kind of like this is a very powerful piece of functionality that you can easily tap into.
Nice.
All right. Any other questions for Sami?
For Samuel?
For Tommy?
Tom.
Great. Well, then next up, Stephen is here to demo some optimization work.
Yeah. So I wanted to demo this thing that I worked on last week, which is sort of a little shuffling of the prefetch logic that was happening in category and product page. If anybody's done any work in here, you might remember that the category query used to make a sort of just an implied prefetch call, wherein when you're on the category page, the here, and I've cleared my cache. The network request would fetch the products that are going to be rendered on that page, so that when you click on the item, it will automatically load as fast as possible for the user, which is a nice optimization on paper, but it actually turned out not to really do that much because you have to wait for the URL resolver query anyways, so that we can determine what component to render when you hit this, a product link. So, so that aside, the category page was prefetching product data, in an attempt to make it faster. On Benio we have six items on the category page. I think is the default that we've used, but I'm sure a lot of you have customized your UIs to render more than six. You can render anything you want. You can paginate as much as you want. So imagine if you had like 50 items on the category page, your category query was fetching 50 products or n products worth of data just to prefetch, and that was all up front, regardless of whether the user clicked the first or the last item. It would get all the items in between. And so one thing I did was move the query for that product data into a less sort of implicit location. It's now just a direct query called get product details, I think. Yeah. And this product, you can see the path here. It belongs to the root component product, which makes this query when you hit the product page itself now. But we're able to sort of use this in two places and maintain the prefetch logic. So here's the product page making its own call, but the gallery item itself, let's see here, this is the gallery. So each one of these items now also uses the product detail query, and inside use gallery item. Inside use gallery item, we have this cool logic here, which creates an intersection observer, waits for 50% of the image, the gallery item, to be in the viewport, and then runs the prefetch query. It uses cache first as a fetch policy, which I believe is the default. So I actually don't think I need to do this here. But that way, the first time you hit this page, first time you scroll into the item, we'll make a prefetch query. We'll say you've already prefetched this thing, so we won't ever try to prefetch again. And if there is something in the cache, it won't do the prefetch because the benefit of doing the prefetch is moot anyways. And so, that's really it. This little logic right here, when it scrolls an item 50% of the way into the viewport, it makes a query. So here I have my local setup. I just want to demo it real quick. So when I load the page, oh, and I've added a gap, by the way, so that way the bottom doesn't render. So you can see here, I think there's the product filters query. So here you now see the 4 products that are in the viewport being requested. The crochet shorts, the capri, yeah. So you can see all of them. Now I'm going to do something that's going to be really magical. Watch as I scroll. Boom. There's the magic right there. The 2 products that just scrolled into the viewport emitted that prefetch query. So now when I click on this, we still have to wait for that URL resolver call, but there's no need to wait or block on the next request, that would otherwise be made if you went directly to this URL. So yeah, you'll see that there are 2 requests once you hit the product page, but that's because we explicitly defined the cache and network fetch policy, which is something I wanted to talk about as well briefly. But you can see the breadcrumbs query and the product details query on the product page use cache and network, and that's just a way to make sure that we true up with the server data, make sure that there's no stale data being rendered in the cache. And that just brings me to a small point, which is something I wanted to float, which is that we might be considering using cache and network as the default fetch policy, because we're using it in a lot of places, and there really isn't, so long as there's not a network error that causes the app to crash, it should be fine to use cache and network, and that we can always lean on the cache first and then update our data afterwards to match the server data. Are there any other things I wanted to talk about? Oh, there's a small bug I wanted to mention here. Inside the category query, we make that products query still, but we don't fetch as much data as we used to. You'll see if you look in here, it's just name, price, small image, and URL key, and that's because that's what's needed to render a gallery item. And we would just be using a gallery item fragment here, but I found there was a bug, and they're resolving it in, I think, 2.4.1, that this wouldn't actually return correctly if you used a fragment. Small image URL would be like null, even though without the fragment, when you inline the property here, it returns the actual value for whatever reason. So just be aware of that if you're writing your own GraphQL queries. If you're trying to use fragments, double check that the data is correct coming back and that there's not a bug, and maybe just reference this issue if you run into that. I think that's it. Is there any questions about the work in this PR?
Yeah, I have one question about the prefetch. Make you a measurement about what is the difference between if you don't prefetch the product on the category page, how fast it is or how slow it is. It's much different between don't prefetch the product, because from my point of view, if you have 40 products and a user scroll on the category page down to the latest product, we still prefetch all products and will get many of GraphQL calls to the backend, and still we get a massive load.
Right. So it's the difference there is, do you batch up front in the category query call, or do you make prefetch queries as you scroll? And you're right. The intersection observer will, if you have a row of 10 items, it'll make 10 GraphQL calls. As you scroll up, it might emit a whole bunch of GraphQL calls. It's possible to remove the prefetch entirely if you want. Let me see. So this call, the product call on this product page took 1.27 seconds, which means that if there is, and this is the cache and network call, but that does mean that if you hit this product with no cache, you would at least be waiting 1.27 seconds on this run. I don't know what the average is. So so that's to be considered at least for the cost of hitting the product page without a cache. The cost to hitting the category page and scrolling is that difference that I mentioned. It's just, do you batch up front in the category call, or do you just prefetch the visible products? I guess there's possibly some safety checks we can do. First of all, we only emit the prefetch once. So, you scroll in, scroll away, scroll back. It doesn't prefetch twice. We might be able to add some sort of like timing check on the intersection observer to see if somebody like scrolls really fast. Make sure it doesn't prefetch just because it like went past the viewport. So there's probably optimizations around that to be done. But I don't have specific numbers in terms of like how much load this would put on the server. So sorry, I don't have an answer for your question, Lars.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
So Stephen, it looks like in chat there's some questions from Chris on how this will scale and the load that it places on the back end. I don't know if you want to check it out or if Chris wants to jump on, so I don't have to interpret the question directly. But
yeah, I'm just I'm trying to see how this will scale for like high traffic environments. If I have 10,000 active users on uncached category pages, I'm hitting GraphQL 100,000 times at once. I'm just trying to work out like how that impacts the back end load, because this could like significantly change that.
Yes.
So, really quick, I would probably like throw this on the edge cache, to be honest. Like all of the catalog data can probably be cached. So I mean
But you're assuming you have a warmed cache.
That's
and right
true.
now you guys don't
So
actually cache, and this is all post request right now still. You guys don't cache any of this in Varnish.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So we're working on that to start using Git for queries, and then Fastly caching will kick in, and then these are going to be like 2-millisecond responses. Somebody just profiled it, but yeah, it's like leaps and bounds better. And then I think like kind of the concern here about overloading the backend would kind of dissipate, because the catalog is something that is heavily edge cached, and that first request would take that 1 second, but every request after that would be speedy. So
but it's only speedy like for one product, right? But if I'm hitting 16 different products on a page that are uncached, and if I save a category, I'm invalidating the cache for that entire category and every page and every filter type in that category.
Yep. I mean, there's things in the Magento cloud to like warm up the cache. There are definitely things you could do to like get around this, but maybe the better question is like, can we feature toggle this on or off? Like, if this isn't functionality that you want, we can make it easier to like turn it off if that's the case.
Yeah, it should be very easy to remove the preload on the category page. From developer point of view, because if you have a high performance case, what Christopher describes there, you don't want maybe prefetch, or maybe you need to a pre-render already, but it's like, it should be one hook or something like that what you need to remove, and then it should be disabled from my point of view.
Really quick, Stephen.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to answer that. So we can make it real easy. I can pass a prop to gallery items that disables should prefetch or something like that. The logic before this PR would have been much more complex to remove that preloading of the category of all the products in the single category query. I know that that's not necessarily the concern that y'all had, because that's the way it works right now. I don't mind adding that prop at all, and then we can keep having that discussion. I think Andrew wants to keep the demos going.
Yeah. I was gonna say it is really important feedback though, so let's make sure we capture it on the PR.
For sure.
We continue the discussion in the PR on how to address it, but for the sake of the last two topics we have on the demo, let's kind of keep moving here. All right. So, yep, thanks, Stephen, and thanks everyone again. Let's pick it back up on the PR and make sure that we close the loop here. Up next, we have Dave, who's going to give us an update on the Obsessive Owl's work on internationalization.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So firstly, I wanted to do a big shout out to Chris. I think he's in the call as that PR you did a little while ago. That was a really great starting point for us to develop our ideas for localization in PWA Studio. So we spent a good long week, me and my team, doing a lot of investigation, a lot of research, and trying to work out what the best solution was for PWA Studio. And we started with the mentality that we want to do something the industry is very used to. So that's the front-end industry. But we also wanted it to be very similar to Magento developers. So we were kind of building a solution for two different unique groups. So from our research, there's obviously a few competing libraries in the space, and I know Chris used I18 Next in his PR. But from all of our research, performance testings, bundle analysis, we found that the React INTL library was actually generally smaller. They both performed about the same, so that was kind of negligible. And then we also saw that it seems to be widely supported in the community. This was kind of hard to judge, really, because the I18 Next library is fragmented across multiple packages. And then we had an internal discussion with Adobe's globalization team, who are responsible for globalizing our SaaS products. So the products that you would typically visit to manage, your Creative Cloud membership or your documents. And they actually used React INTL. They had actually forked it internally to enhance the library. Sadly, that library is closed source, so we weren't able to use that. But based on all their research as well, this pointed us more towards this library choice. And we intend to implement this as expected, following their guidelines and their documentation. So when you think of localization in PWA Studio, you're actually just doing React INTL. There's no special source, there's no weird Magento abstraction. It's just you can go use those docs, and 95% of those docs will be true to how to use it in PWA Studio. So the next big decision we made was where we should retrieve those translations from. So in Magento typical development, as you're probably aware, you have .csv files within an I18N directory. So we wanted to explore how best to still get value from these, but not overcomplicate our solution. So I know Chris's original PR actually used the GraphQL endpoint to retrieve the translations directly from Magento, but we felt for this first initial push that would add a little bit too much complexity for the solution we want to get out. So we opted to actually store these in the PWA Studio app, which will actually be within the NPM packages that the PWA Studio app is built up with. So, Venia will own its own translations for any strings present in that app. Page Builder is now an extension, so it would have its own translations too. And, the main reason we chose this is it's simple. It's very transparent of what it's doing. It's going to load some files and combine them together. It's going to be very fast, and it's very predictable. There's a single source of truth for all translations, and it's within the app. So we also noted that there are wants and needs for other ways of retrieving these translations. Getting them from Magento is certainly not a bad idea by any means. So we certainly intend to build this part of the localization as an adapter, so you can build in new strategies to easily grab them from Magento, or even hit a third-party service, which is one of those paid localization things. So this was kind of the best for everyone. We want to be able to deliver this as quickly as possible, so this fits in with that idea. We also intend to do automatic locale detection using accept language, which is fairly common, and there will be a store and currency switcher, which will have parity with Luma in the way they function. As part of this work, we are going to touch on some multi-store concepts, but we have a future item of work where we will complete that. So there will be some elements of multi-store created as part of localization, but we're trying to, keep them as separate as possible. So with that, any questions or anyone want clarifications on our decisions here?
How easy is it to update or add new translations if it's a package? Does it need to be a new version or something else?
Yeah, so we would most likely see language packs. Say if you wanted to build a Russian language pack as a new npm package, which would just be npm installed.
Okay. So just checking, I don't know how localization is it like per word basis or like per sentence basis? Like you have like hello world, for instance. Is it
Per
two
phrase.
translations or is it just one translation?
It's per phrase. You can't translate single words because the sentences wouldn't make sense. You need
Yeah.
to translate the whole phrase.
Okay, the phrase. Okay, okay. So I was like thinking like how often would it happen that people would like to add new translations and how many versions or like how many times they have to redeploy their app
Mhm.
just to get the new translations into the app or like a new language set. Um,
Yeah,
I don't
so
know how often would that happen is just checking.
all of those things are deployments right now in Magento anyway, so they would continue to be builds and deploys in PWA Studio. Translation shouldn't change over time. The only times they would feasibly change is if you've done development to add a new feature set or installed a new extension. All of your entity data like products, categories, CMS pages, you still localize that in the Magento admin. So when GraphQL requests the page, if you've translated it under the specific store, it will get the correct version.
Got it. Cool.
Uh,
Thanks, Dave.
I have one question about developer experience there. Currently, we have already many language pack built for Magento 2, but this is in a CSV file format, and I don't know if we can provide some converter or it's possible to have some migration part, because I think some translation will be the same in Luma and Veneer. And from my point of view, maybe we can reduce them or make it very easy to move this translation to a own language pack. This is maybe one thing what we can improve there, or it's I don't know.
Yeah, and we highlighted this. We'll definitely explore building a tool to translate these language packs over. React INTL typically uses a JSON file, but it's still fundamentally just a load of strings in a file in a certain format. So going from CSV to JSON is super easy. So yeah, a converter would definitely be on the table.
Cool, thank you.
Anyone else?
So how, within a local project, how you're merging in the package translations with the local project translations?
The package and local translation. So we are still in the discovery phase, so we haven't built these parts yet, but we intend to use special features to allow modules to declare additional translation strings. So kind of following a similar pattern to how as its module translations in each module. That makes sense. And then it merges them later on. So right now, the local translations would need to sit in a package somewhere. So it depends if you typically would create an external npm package for your customizations, or if you're just editing, Veneer directly. If you're editing Veneer directly, you can just modify the translations inside that directory.
Wait, so you're putting it in Venue Concept or you're putting in like Venue UI?
They will be housed wherever the strings are located. So I believe it's in whichever one of those all the files are in.
Venue UI, which means you can't modify it directly because that's installed into npm. So like, and we need to be able to. So one of the typical use cases for translations is just like simply renaming strings across the Magento front end. Like one of the common ones will be like wish list, right? That's a phrase that is commonly translated to like favorites, and you would just do that with another English in your theme. So in like your structure, how would you do something like that?
So we have that concept baked into how we intend to build this. So we would use the build bus ordering to, when we have key conflicts, when merging all the translation files, similar to how Magento does, the one later on in the order would become the priority. So if you had a npm extension that wanted to rename wishlist, as you just said, you would make sure it's in the correct order after Venue UI or concept, so then its key will override the others. that's similar to how Magento works in priority.
Right, but I need to be able to do that in my theme, not through an NPM package. Like in my
Mm-hmm.
venue concept, I need to be able to merge that in, right? And prioritize what's in my venue concept, which isn't an NPM package.
Okay, well, we will definitely explore that a little bit further and get you a more definitive answer.
Yeah, just for the sake of time here, I'll step in again because you definitely want to get to Zetlin here with extensibility. There's obviously a lot of fairly large and future-forward decisions that are being made here with around internationalization in the project. So we want to make sure that we're being very transparent about those decisions, why we're making them, how we're moving forward, and we're getting that feedback from the larger community. So Chris, obviously you're key in a lot of that feedback. So again, let's make sure that we're picking up this feedback loop in the PR and this conversation in the PR. And then we're continuing the dialogue as we move forward. But thanks, Dave. Again, we'll follow up, and then we can also obviously also follow up with the community Slack. So without further ado, James, apologize. We saved some time here at the end. I think if everyone's willing to stick around for a few extra minutes as well, while James kind of dives into the weeds here on extensibility. And obviously, we're going to have some other follow-ups as well around extensibility.
No worries at all. So, hello, everybody. There's a lot to cover. I think I was supposed to do this last week, and I had a sort of a scheduling conflict with personal city stuff, renewing a license. And so by this time, I think enough time has passed that I'm not totally sure what is the most on people's minds anymore. But we have been having some internal conversations with other teams at Adobe, and they are definitely using the system in the same way that you folks working outside of the company are. And so I've had some interesting feedback quite recently. Originally, I was going to show the routing system and kind of how it's built up from the bottom up. And I can still do that, but I can also show something that I discussed recently with an internal team and that I discussed with a certain community maintainer who can show himself if he wants to. And that subject is replacing components. How we would do it, how we would support it with multiple components, and how we would do that without having to do too much work. Who's ready for that? Come on, I just need like...
Everyone.
Come on.
Everyone's ready.
Everyone's ready for that. Okay, so I have an issue. Hold on. I need to get it working again. Come on. I have an issue where there's all sorts of components in this app. I'm going to see about sharing my screen. Oh, come on. Just another minute. Oh, I already didn't have much time. Okay. All right, can you guys see?
Very tiny,
Yep.
but yes.
All right, well, I'll make it bigger. So here's the main component. The main component renders everything inside the browser view. So we can see that because it's got the header, and then it's got everything else, and it's got the footer. The main component lives in Venia UI, that whole big list of components, and yet it lives alongside all these things, but it's not reachable from an external system. We know from the stuff we've discussed earlier that Venia UI, the package, declares a few targets. You can change the rich content renderer. You can add some routes. So far, that's what we got. But there's no actual way to mess with these components. And so the typical way that somebody who knows much about Webpack would do it is, hold on one second. There it is. The typical way that somebody would do it in the sort of the world of Webpack is that they would just add a Webpack alias. And you can do that here in the Webpack config, which is just part of the Venia concept package, right? This is your PWA, and if you want to replace one main component with another, you could do it in a way that you might find familiar. Alias, Magento, Venia UI, lib components main.js. Let's replace that with Magento, Venia, alt main components, lib components alt main.js. So I guess that would work, but there's a problem with it. And the problem is that my alt component, hold on, can you see my other project? I've switched code windows. Just want to make sure you can see it. Okay, so gotcha. So in my experiments repository, which I've showed off before, I've created an alt main component, and it's a new extension package, which I just want to be able to install, and then it replaces the main component. But inside the alt main component, I can make a Webpack config.js all I want, but it's going to ignore it. I can't change Webpack config.js from my extension. So in order to get my main component to be replaced in this way, I have to add documentation to my extension that says something like, I know this is tedious, but put this in Webpack config.js after installing. Sorry. Alias. You get the idea. We don't want to have to do that, especially because we would like these extensions to be able to compose without making people update their code over and over again. So, unfortunately, because we can't use aliases, there's another sort of Webpack-related mechanism, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can show you. Normal module replacement plugin. I'm going to share my whole desktop, and you see it? Okay, I know we're short on time. So there is a Webpack plugin called Normal Module Replacement plugin, which lets you replace one module with another in the manner of an alias. And we can add Webpack plugins because of the Webpack compiler target. So here in the package JSON, I have added an interceptor and made a tap into the Webpack compiler so that I can add a normal module replacement plugin. Cool, cool, cool. This works basically. And sure enough, my alt component, which as you can see, just takes away the header and the footer, has automatically been installed. I didn't need to do anything besides just install that package, and then it worked. It replaced. But this sucks. I mean, it's better than saying you got to do this, but this seems unacceptably low level for such a common operation for replacing a component. You have to get access to a compiler. You have to instantiate a plugin. This is not great. So what can we do about it? I want to encourage people to get creative with the targets and the APIs that they propose to add. And one thing that you could do is we could start using something like this, and we could add the concept to Venia. And we don't have time to demonstrate this whole thing, but here in the Venia targets directory, you could add a kind of a new target, and let's call it, say, components API. And then in the interceptor, we would do something like this. So let's make a component API. So you could do this for every single component and do it manually, right? And then you would call the target targets Webpack compiler targets. I think it's built-ins, right? We got built-ins? Yeah. Webpack compiler. Anyway, you get the idea. So I'm creating this API, and then when I pass it in, once I'm inside the Webpack compiler, targets own components tap or call, I pass that component API, and then people can call this and pass those things into the compiler. But also, for the number of components we have, this also is large and sort of ugly. So we could do something even crazier, which is that we could go through the directory of components, like, don't do this. You get the idea. So at that point, even though this is not the safest way to do it, we've actually automatically generated an API with a single target that you could use to call a function which overrides any of these things. So this is the kind of compromise between being able to override anything automatically and being able to decide as the implementer of Venia that that's capable of override. And that would make this less ugly. So a little bit of a shortened demo. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to start off with, or just jump in here and also add, this is a very large topic, something that I think a lot of people are excited for, but there's a lot of, I think, time that we need to really properly go over it. So we're looking at, how we host the right types of kind of training, labs or hackathons in the future with the community to make sure that everyone is kind of educated on this kind of new extensibility framework. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I know that we have a lot more to talk about, but rather than do sort of updates on how you guys can get involved, I thought you might want some real meat, some real interesting actual implementation things.
And since I know that we are now 5 minutes over our allotted end time, if there are no pressing questions for James, we'll make sure to pick this back up. If we even have to put it back on the agenda for next week, we'll do that as well so we can go into some more of the details. And some more of the weeds there. I think that it's definitely a topic that I think people are interested in seeing more about. So we are now 6 minutes over. Anybody have any other questions? Any other comments for the team? We didn't get to community corner, but Lars or Jordan's not here. But Lars, if you have anything, all right, cool.
No.
You don't have anything.
We are already over.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks everybody for
but
hanging out for an
nice.
extra few minutes. We'll see you all again next week. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.
Thank you. Lars, show off your own thing in the community chat because he made something even cooler. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.